He had always believed that doubt was the slowest kind of poison. It didn't strike all at once like rage or jealousy. It seeped into the cracks, invisible at first, souring every moment, every word, every touch. And now, it was coursing through him, burning away the certainty he once held like armor. It started with small things. Texts she didn't answer right away, plans she changed last minute, laughter on the phone that cut off too quickly when he entered the room. He told himself not to read into it. People were allowed private lives, but private lives turned into secret lives when the wrong shadows fell across them. She said she was pregnant after they had barely patched things together. After months of shouting, silent nights, and slammed doors. It had seemed like a miracle then, something to tie them back to the version of themselves they once believed in. He remembered touching her stomach when she told him, feeling nothing, yet feeling everything. Hope, fear, a blinding, overwhelming need to be better. For her, for the child, for himself. He tried to hold on to that memory, but it was slipping now like everything else. The doubt dug deeper. The dates didn't add up perfectly. The timing seemed too clean, too convenient. When he asked small, harmless questions, her answers felt rehearsed, like someone remembering lines instead of living the truth. The way she smiled was different too, stretched tight across her face like a mask that might split open if he looked too closely. He started noticing things he hadn't seen before. The way her phone never left her side, the way she recoiled when he mentioned marriage, the way she always had an excuse to avoid his family. He told himself he was imagining it. That paranoia was a disease worse than betrayal. But the voice inside him, the one that woke him at night and chased sleep from his mind, told him otherwise. He began to watch her, quietly, from doorways, from across crowded rooms, from the corner of his own kitchen while pretending to check his phone. He wasn't looking for proof, he was looking for cracks, and he found them. They weren't affairs, not in the obvious sense. No lipstick on shirts, no late-night messages from strangers. But there were receipts for places he hadn't been, conversations that shifted too quickly, friends he never met, who suddenly became too important to lose. And the worst part was she never looked guilty. She looked tired. She looked like someone carrying a burden she couldn't put down. At first, he thought the baby was a mistake, that she had made a choice she couldn't undo and he was just collateral damage. But then he thought deeper, darker. What if the child wasn't his? What if this was all a construction, a trap built from guilt and fear and necessity, a chain she wrapped around him before disappearing with someone else? The thought burrowed into him, relentless, festering. It changed the way he looked at her, changed the way he spoke to her. Every smile became a sneer in disguise, every laugh a dagger hidden in a velvet glove. He asked her once, point blank, in the middle of an argument that started over nothing and spiraled into everything, whether she was sure the baby was his. She froze, not for long, but long enough. Long enough that his heart, already fragile and splintered, shattered into dust. She said yes, of course. How could he ask such a thing? But the crack had already formed. He didn't believe her. That night, he sat alone in their darkened living room, the television flashing ghostly images he didn't watch, turning the DNA test kit over and over in his hands. He had bought it days ago, tucked it away like a dirty secret he wasn't ready to confront. Now it felt heavy, accusatory, a loaded weapon wrapped in sterile packaging. He imagined using it, imagined the relief if he was right and the devastation if he was wrong. Either way, something would end. Either way, something already had. She fell asleep before he came to bed. He sat beside her for a long time, staring at the rise and fall of her breathing, the peacefulness he could no longer reach. He thought about waking her, forcing her to confront it, to fight, to scream, to prove her innocence or confess her guilt, but he didn't. He just sat there letting the silence stretch between them like a noose. Doubt wasn't a poison anymore. It was a fire, and it was consuming everything. By morning, the decision had hardened inside him, bitter and sharp. He wouldn't wait for more lies. He wouldn't watch himself be dismantled piece by piece while she played the part of the perfect mother-to-be. He wouldn't let her steal the last parts of himself he still recognized. If she had lied about something this sacred, she didn't deserve to be forgiven. She deserved to disappear, just like the trust she had murdered without hesitation. It wasn't rage that carried him through the following days. Rage was hot, messy, explosive. This was something colder, cleaner, a surgical kind of hate that came with its own twisted sense of logic. He began to plan, not in frantic moments of passion, but in slow, deliberate strokes. He measured time. He counted steps. He rehearsed lies for the neighbors, imagined alibis he wouldn't need if he moved quickly enough. In the stillness of early morning, he found himself smiling, not with happiness, but with relief. The weight of uncertainty was lifting, replaced by grim purpose. He told himself this wasn't murder, this was justice, this was survival, this was the final necessary cut to excise the infection before it destroyed him completely. And somewhere deep inside him, in the part of himself he had long buried under pride and fear, he heard a whisper, a warning. You might be wrong. But by then it was already too late to listen. The morning it happened, the world outside their house looked exactly the same pale light crawling over the kitchen counter, the same cars rumbling past on the main road, the same distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Nothing in the universe seemed to register that something irreversible was about to happen. And maybe that was the cruelest part of it all, how ordinary the day began, how easy it was to blend catastrophe into the fabric of normal life. No grand signs, no sudden warnings, just a slow, cold certainty settling inside him, layer by layer, until he could hardly remember a time when he didn't feel it. He had rehearsed the moment in his mind 1,000 different ways. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she screamed, sometimes she simply accepted it, as if some part of her had always known it would end like this. But none of those fantasies prepared him for the strange, numbing calm that overtook him as he watched her move through the morning routine. She buttered toast. She hummed an old song under her breath. She smiled at him across the table, a small, tired smile, like the first crack in a dam. He could have walked away then, could have left the house and never looked back. But something, deeper, more broken, pushed him forward. She mentioned the baby while rinsing dishes, her hand resting lightly on the curve of her belly. It was a simple comment, a mundane thought about cribs and colors, about hope. He barely heard the words. All he could hear was the roaring silence that followed, his own heart hammering too loudly in his ears, his mind screaming the same accusation over and over, liar. He had chosen the spot days ago, behind the shed where the ground softened after heavy rains. It was isolated enough that no one would notice a disturbance. Far enough from prying eyes, but close enough to explain away any noise if it came to that. He had dug the hole himself, feeling the shovel splinter in his hands, the earth surrendering one heavy clump at a time. He buried the guilt with every thrust of the blade, telling himself again and again that this was the only way. The moment itself was almost mundane in its execution. No shouting, no grand confessions. Just a sudden movement, a struggle that ended too quickly, her body crumpling in a way that didn't seem real. He didn't give himself time to process it. He moved on instinct, on the numb precision of a man who had already died inside long before he ever touched her. The ground swallowed her with terrifying ease. The earth accepted its burden without protest, without judgment. He covered the grave, quickly, efficiently, pressing the soil down until there was no sign of what lay beneath it. Only when he stood back, sweat soaking through his clothes, dirt under his nails, did he realize he was shaking. But it wasn't fear. It wasn't even sadness. It was emptiness, a hollow thudding where his heart should have been. He returned to the house like a sleepwalker, cleaned himself in the sink, scrubbing until his skin turned raw. He burned her clothes in the rusted drum behind the garage, watching the smoke curl into the sky and disappear as if it had never existed. He bagged up small items she had left lying around, the hairbrush, the worn sweater on the couch, the half-empty mug on the counter, and shoved them deep into the trash, under layers of household waste, as if burying them could erase her from his memory. For the rest of the day he went through the motions, answered a few texts she had scheduled earlier that week, laughed stiffly when friends called to check in. He told anyone who asked that she was visiting family out of town, a trip they had been planning for months but had kept quiet about. He fabricated it so smoothly that he began to believe it himself. The greatest lies, he realized, were not the ones you told others. They were the ones you told yourself, again and again, until the truth became too blurred to recognize. At night, he sat in the dark living room, the silence pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. He played out every possible consequence in his mind, the police showing up, her family demanding answers, neighbors remembering something strange. Each scenario ended the same way, with him sitting exactly where he was now, alone, invisible, forgotten. He should have felt relief, freedom, the chance to start over, to rebuild the life she had ruined with her betrayal. But instead he felt a different kind of rot beginning to take hold, something slower, deeper. He felt it in the way the walls seemed to close in around him, the way every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps coming for him. He felt it in the phantom weight of her gaze, lingering on him from somewhere just out of sight. Late that night he found himself standing at the back window, staring into the darkness where he knew the grave lay. He told himself it was done, final. But the doubt, the same doubt that had led him here, had twisted into something new, a question he couldn't silence. What if he had been wrong? The thought gnawed at him as he climbed into bed alone, as he lay awake counting every breath, every shadow, every whisper of the wind. Doubt had once driven him to destroy. Now it was preparing to destroy him, not with noise, not with blood, with silence. And the silence was just beginning. It took 10 days for the letter to arrive, 10 days of pretending, 10 days of meticulously keeping up the lie he had built with dirt and ash and silence. 10 days of fighting the suffocating sense that the house itself had turned against him. The air inside seemed thicker, harder to breathe. The walls groaned at night, stretching and settling as if they knew something he could barely admit to himself. He barely ate. He barely slept. He existed in the in-between, trapped between the memory of what he had done and the fear of what it might mean if he had been wrong. The letter came on a morning like any other, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a credit card bill. It was thin, unassuming, slipped into the mailbox without fanfare. His hands trembled the moment he saw the return address, the lab, the test. For a moment, the world froze around him. The neighbor's dog barking, the hum of a delivery truck. Down the street, the birds shrieking from the trees, it all faded into a dull, throbbing nothingness. Only the envelope mattered now, only the truth inside it. He closed the door carefully behind him, as if sudden movement might shatter the fragile illusion he had created. The kitchen table was still cluttered with the remnants of a life half-lived, an empty coffee cup, a crumpled grocery list, a cracked phone charger coiled like a dying snake. He sat heavily in the chair, the envelope gripped in fingers that had once gripped a shovel in cold resolve. For a moment he simply stared at it, heart hammering against his ribs, breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He thought about not opening it, about burning it, throwing it away, pretending it had never existed. Ignorance could be a kind of salvation. But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself, he knew he wouldn't survive not knowing. The doubt had already eaten too deep. It had already cost him too much. The letter was simple, no dramatics, no long explanations, just the sterile language of science. The probability of paternity is 99.999%. The child was his. There was no mistake. He read the line once, then again, until the words blurred and bled into each other, until they felt less like text, and more like a noose tightening around his throat. The paper slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. The sound it made, a dry, whispering scrape, was deafening in the silence. He stumbled back from the table, crashing into a chair, his breath tearing free in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to tilt, the floor threatening to open up beneath him. He had killed her. He had buried her. And she had been telling the truth. The magnitude of what he had done crushed him, folding him inward until he felt smaller than he had ever been, less human than he had ever been. He wanted to scream, but there was no voice left inside him. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere he could go that wouldn't be drenched in the blood of his mistake. For hours he sat there, paralyzed, replaying every moment he could never undo. Her voice, her touch, her tears, all filtered now through the cold lens of guilt and horror. Every memory twisted into a knife, cutting deeper than the last. Every smile he had doubted, every laugh he had questioned, every truth he had thrown away. They all returned now, merciless and sharp. Night fell and he didn't move. He didn't eat. He didn't answer the phone when it rang twice and then stopped. He didn't turn on the lights when the sun disappeared behind the hills and left him alone in the dark. He sat in the wreckage, of his own making, too hollow to even cry. It wasn't until the second knock at the door, low, deliberate, and horribly real, that he stirred. The sound was wrong, too soft to be casual, too heavy to be polite. It crawled under his skin, setting every nerve alight. He stared at the door, heart frozen, unable to process the new terror blooming inside him. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He had buried the evidence, he had crafted the lie. There were no loose ends. There couldn't be. But someone was there. Someone who knew. Someone who had come to collect the debt he owed to the living and the dead alike. He rose from the chair on unsteady legs, each step toward the door feeling like a march to the gallows. The house was silent except for the frantic pounding of his own heart. The second knock came again, sharper this time, more insistent. He reached for the doorknob, hand trembling so violently he barely managed to grasp it. He half expected the police, her family, a stranger, a nightmare conjured into flesh by guilt and madness. But when he finally opened the door, the night greeted him with something worse. A stroller. Small, pristine, out of place against the cracked concrete and dying grass of the front yard. In the stroller, bundled in soft blue blankets, was a baby, his baby. And resting gently on the baby's lap almost tenderly was an old battered tape recorder. It was already playing. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The tape hissed softly in the night air, a broken, ghostly whisper. And then her voice came through, clear, fragile, unbearably real. If you're hearing this, it means you made the wrong choice. The stroller sat motionless under the flickering porch light, and the night seemed to fold inward, swallowing him whole. He staggered back, hand pressed to his mouth, vision swimming. The guilt he had barely begun to process now exploded into something vast and uncontrollable, something too large for one man to carry alone. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a single, unanswerable question screamed louder than anything else. If she was dead, who had sent the baby? And who was coming next? The tape recorder whirred on, filling the night with a broken mechanical hiss. Her voice wove through the static, soft but steady, as if she were speaking from another world. He stood, frozen in the doorway, paralyzed by the sound of the dead addressing him. He hadn't heard her voice in what felt like centuries, but now it filled the air around him like smoke, clinging to his skin, poisoning every breath. The baby whimpered lightly from the stroller, a fragile human sound that snapped him back into motion. His fingers trembled violently as he reached out and hit the stop button on the recorder. The silence that followed felt even heavier than her voice. He lifted the baby, cradling the small, warm body against his chest, and stumbled back into the house, dragging the stroller and the recorder inside behind him. He kicked the door shut, without looking, as if he could shut the entire nightmare out with a simple slam of wood and metal. The weight of the child in his arms was overwhelming. Every heartbeat, every tiny breath was a living accusation, proof that everything he believed, everything he had destroyed, was built on a lie of his own making. He set the baby down carefully in the living room, half afraid that if he blinked, It would all vanish. The baby, the stroller, the tape, exposed as some terrible trick of his collapsing mind. But the child remained, blinking up at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes, the faintest trace of her mother's features already beginning to emerge in the soft curves of her face. He turned his attention to the recorder. His hands moved mechanically, rewinding the tape, replaying the message again and again. Each time her words cut deeper. They spoke not of anger or revenge, but of sadness, of inevitability, of a plan that had been set in motion long before he had realized he was only a pawn. She spoke of betrayal, not by her, but by others. She spoke of danger, of debts owed, of promises broken, and she spoke of the child, their child, and the lengths she had gone to in order to protect her. The recorder crackled and died with a final click, leaving him drowning in a silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. He pressed, his forehead against the cool wood of the coffee table, body racked with shaking breaths. Somewhere above him the house groaned, as if shifting under the weight of his guilt. He didn't know how long he stayed like that, folded into himself before the second knock came. It was louder this time, more deliberate, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission, the kind that promised consequences. He jolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs like a drumbeat of doom. His mind raced, scrambling for explanations, plans, denials. He thought of the grave behind the shed, now just a dark patch of disturbed earth. He thought of the neighbors, the noise, the chance that someone, anyone, had seen what he had tried to hide. Another knock, 3 sharp raps that reverberated through the house. He stumbled to the window, careful to stay low, and peered through a slit in the curtains. The porch light flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows across the yard. At first he saw nothing, just the empty street, the skeletal trees swaying in the night wind, the stroller abandoned just outside the door like a forgotten relic. Then he saw the figure, a man, standing just beyond the edge of the light. Too far to make out details, but close enough to know he was being watched. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, silent and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. Fresh wave of panic rose in his throat. He grabbed his phone, hands slipping against the screen, but the signal was dead. No service, no escape. He thought about the baby, sleeping now in the middle of the living room, and felt a sickening lurch of fear. Whoever was out there, whatever game had begun, the child was the centerpiece, the bait, the proof, and maybe the punishment. The man knocked again, slower this time, almost mockingly. He knew he couldn't stay hidden. Whoever was outside already knew he was there. Hiding would only delay the inevitable. He moved toward the door, each step heavier than the last, feeling as though he were sinking into the floorboards with every movement. At the threshold, he paused. He could feel the figure's presence just beyond the thin barrier of wood and metal. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the door, willing himself to find some fragment of courage, some thread of reason to hold on to. A small voice inside him whispered that this was the end of it, that everything he had done, every choice he had made, had led to this moment, that no amount of fear or regret would change what was about to happen. He opened the door. The porch was empty. Only the stroller remained, its wheels gently turning in the wind. The man was gone, vanished as silently as he had appeared. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it all, if the exhaustion and guilt had finally shattered his mind completely. Then he saw it. Pinned to the stroller's handle was another letter, smaller this time. Handwritten. His name scrawled across the front in a shaky, familiar hand. He ripped it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single line. "You buried the wrong one." He staggered back, the letter falling from his hands like a dead bird. The night seemed to tilt around him, the stars spinning crazily overhead. He could hear his own heartbeat loud and frantic, drowning out every other sound. The ground beneath him felt unstable, like it could crack open at any second and swallow him whole. Because now he understood. He hadn't just destroyed an innocent life. He had unleashed something far worse. And whatever had been set in motion, whatever dark current was now pulling him under, it was only just beginning. The letter burned in his hand like it carried a curse, each word branded into his mind. You buried the wrong one. The weight of that message pinned him in place, colder and heavier than anything he had ever felt. The stroller creaked slightly in the wind, as if mocking him. The house loomed behind him, a hollow shell filled with ghosts he had created. Somewhere deep inside, a new fear began to grow, not of the police or judgment, but of something far worse, something unseen, something patient. He forced himself to move, snatching up the letter, the baby, the recorder, and dragging them all back into the house. He bolted the door, locked every window, checked them twice. But he knew it was useless. Locks kept out strangers, not consequences. He placed the baby carefully in the center of the living room, surrounded by old cushions, trying to create some illusion of safety, some pathetic barrier against the inevitable. The night pressed in around him, thick and impenetrable. Every shadow stretched too long. Every creak of the floorboards echoed too loudly. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter in front of him, the recorder beside it, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold himself upright. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed confession. He needed to hear her voice again, needed to believe that somewhere, somehow, this nightmare had a shape he could understand. He pressed play. At first, there was only static, the empty, hissing breath of the tape as it spun forward. Then, faintly, her voice emerged, broken, strained, but unmistakably hers. If you're hearing this, she said, then you already know you made the wrong choice. The sound was raw, like it had been recorded in secret, in fear. Each word dragged from her throat as if it cost her something to say it. He leaned in, every muscle tensed, barely breathing. You thought I lied, she continued. You thought I betrayed you, but it wasn't me. It was never me. He closed his eyes, the guilt slicing deeper, threading through his veins like poison. Her voice quivered, cracked, and then steadied again. I knew they were coming for me, she said. I knew they would use you to get to me. I tried to warn you, but they were already too close. I didn't have time to explain. I barely had time to save her. Save who? The baby? Herself? Someone else? You have to protect her now. Her voice whispered, softer than before, even if you don't understand why. Even if you hate me. The tape clicked and whirred. A silence fell. Then something else. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A low murmuring, a background noise, like a second voice buried beneath hers. He rewound the tape and played it again, isolating the moment. It wasn't just a second voice, it was several. Whispers. Menacing. Urgent. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone chilled him to the bone. Whoever they weren't strangers. They were part of the story he had missed. The war. She had fought alone while he sharpened his knives against her. The tape ended with a hollow final click. He sat there staring at the machine, the letter, the baby. His mind a cyclone of questions he couldn't answer. How much had he misunderstood? How much had he destroyed with his own hands, convinced he was delivering justice? And if he hadn't buried her, then who had he buried? He stumbled to his feet, pacing the living room in frantic circles. The baby stirred but did not cry, as if sensing the dread hanging in the air. He glanced out the window, half expecting to see the figure again standing in the dark with endless patience. But the street was empty, silent. His phone vibrated suddenly on the counter, the screen lighting up with a number he didn't recognize. For a long moment he just stared at it, fear rooting him to the spot. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to smash the phone and run. But running wouldn't save him. It never had. He answered. At first, there was only breathing. Heavy, slow, deliberate, then a voice, not hers, not anyone he knew. You made your move, the voice said, low and emotionless. Now it's our turn. The line went dead. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. The room seemed to pulse around him, every shadow deepening, every creak of the house, sharpening into a threat. His mind raced. Who were they? What did they want? The baby? Him? Both? He tried to think rationally, but panic was a thick fog clouding every thought. He thought about the people she had mentioned, the debts, the dangers circling like sharks. He realized now that her pregnancy had been a shield, a desperate attempt to build something too sacred to destroy. And he had shattered it, left them both exposed. Another sound broke through his spiral of fear. A knock. Not at the front door. This time, it came from the back of the house. 3 knocks. Slow. Measured. He crept toward the hallway, every nerve screaming in protest. The knock came again, louder this time. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't desperate. It was inevitable. He gripped the nearest object, a heavy lamp, in his fist, moving toward the source of the sound. The baby whimpered from the living room, a tiny, helpless sound that cut through his fear like a knife. He had to protect her. He had already failed once. He couldn't fail again. As he reached the back door, he could see the outline of a figure through the frosted glass, tall, still, waiting. He tightened his grip on the lamp, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The figure knocked once more, and then, slowly, carefully, slid a small object through the mail slot. A cassette tape. It landed on the floor with a soft thud, spinning slightly before, coming to rest at his feet. He stared at it, unable to move. Outside, the figure retreated into the night without a word, swallowed by the darkness. He bent down, picked up the tape with shaking hands, and stared at it as if it might detonate in his palm. Another voice, another message, another truth waiting to destroy whatever was left of him. He had thought that burying her would end the nightmare, but the truth was, it had only just begun. The tape sat on the table like a loaded weapon, small and unassuming, but carrying the weight of every mistake he had made, every choice he could never undo. For hours he stared at it, the night dragging on, stretching thin and brittle around him. The baby had fallen asleep again, her small chest rising and falling in rhythmic innocence, utterly unaware of the dark machinery grinding outside the fragile walls of the house. He envied her ignorance, her chance at beginning without, the stain of the past anchoring her to ruin. When he finally played the tape, it was not a confession, it was a map. Her voice, clear and controlled, filled the room once more, but there was no warmth left in it. She sounded like someone speaking from the other side of something vast and irreversible. "They told me what would happen if I spoke," she said. "They told me what would happen to you, to her." Her words wove a terrible story, one he had never imagined. A network of lies, debts, and promises made in the shadows. It had started years before they met. A deal struck in desperation, a debt incurred that could not simply be erased. She had tried to escape it by hiding in plain sight, by starting a life with him, by building something real. But the past had a long reach, and the men she had once trusted had no intention of letting her slip away so easily. They needed something, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Someone, he realized now with a sick certainty that it hadn't been about betrayal or love. It had been about survival. She had been caught between two worlds, playing a game he hadn't even known existed, and he, blind and furious, had been the perfect pawn. He hadn't saved anyone. He had only broken the last fragile defense she had left. She described the others, those who had fallen before her, those who had tried to fight, to run, to disappear, men and women who were now names without faces, shadows without histories. They had been erased not by chance but by design, by a group so skilled at hiding their sins that even their crimes left no echo. They had watched him too. Watched him unravel. Watched him become a tool for his own destruction. "You were supposed to protect her," she said. "But you chose yourself." The tape clicked to a stop, leaving the room soaked in silence once again. He sat back, stunned, hollow. Every memory, Of her, every argument, every laugh, every tear, it all replayed under a new merciless light. She hadn't betrayed him. She had trusted him, even as the walls closed in, even as the noose tightened around both their necks. And he had been the one to tighten it. A car engine hummed outside, snapping him back to the present. He crawled to the window and peered through. A crack in the blinds. A black car idled across the street, headlights off, windows dark. Watching. Waiting. He realized then that there would be no redemption. No forgiveness, no second chances. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. In trying to escape betrayal, he had become the betrayer. In seeking justice, he had committed the gravest injustice of all. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry that pierced the suffocating quiet. He rushed to her side, gathering her into his arms, feeling the tiny heartbeat against his chest. He pressed his lips to her forehead, breathing her in, anchoring himself to this one, undeniable truth. She was all that mattered now. She was the only piece of her mother he hadn't destroyed. But even as he held her, he knew they wouldn't let her go easily. She was a prize, a bargaining chip, a loose end that needed tying off. They hadn't sent the stroller and the tapes out, of pity. They had sent them as a warning. He thought about running, about disappearing into the vast empty places where maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't find them. But deep down, he knew better. You couldn't outrun shadows. You couldn't bury a past that was still alive and hunting you. The knock came again, softer this time, almost polite. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved quietly to the back of the house, grabbed the emergency bag he had packed months ago, back when paranoia had first whispered in his ear, back when he still believed he was the hunter, not the prey. It wasn't much. A few bills, some clothes, an old prepaid phone, but it was something. He bundled the baby into a carrier against his chest, tucking her close under his jacket. Her small fingers gripped the fabric tightly, sensing the tension radiating from him. He slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows, heart pounding with every step. The night swallowed him whole. As he moved through the alleys and over fences, he realized something profound. He would never clear his name, never wash the blood from his hands, never explain to the world why he did what he did. His story was not one of redemption or heroism. It was a story of failure, of selfishness, of the cost of believing the wrong things, too late. He wasn't running toward freedom. He was running toward an unknown future that would always be shaped by what he had done. He would live in the cracks of society, in the forgotten spaces, raising the daughter of the woman he had failed, always looking over his shoulder, always listening for the next knock at the door. Because in the end, the ones who remained in the shadows never really left. They just waited. And now, he was part of their world, whether he wanted to be or not, a ghost among the living, another secret buried in the dark.